Hey there, this is part 3, and we got the tire to bounce, and now we want it to squash when it hits the floor. Let's see. Here we got the squash and bounce, and here we have the scaling factors, and let's first look at this is the first time it hits the floor. So we want it to squish, but we wanted to stretch a little bit over the z-axis and squish a little bit over the y-axis so you have the same volume, because things that are squishy don't change in volume. Now what I'm going to do is just move back to frame 9, and whoa, it's quite a distance. Frame 9, it shouldn't be squished. Why? Because it's not hitting anything, so it shouldn't be squished. Actually, we're going to stretch it later on with the stretch and roll, but it shouldn't be squished right now. So let's see, the z and the y axes. So z and y in reverse order are keyframed. Now, as soon as it hits, it should squish over the y-axis. Let's put it down to 0.8, so it's getting smaller, but this one has to increase because otherwise you have a different volume. That doesn't make any sense. So I'll just put it down to 1.2, right? Basically the opposite, and give it a keyframe. You saw this little yellow circle? That means there's animation here, but there's no keyframe at this spot. A red dot means there's a keyframe. All right, now let's see. It should basically here, it should already, maybe even here, it should already be unsquashed. But let's take care of that in the timeline menu. And Shift F3, and I'm actually going to do this here because it's easier. I don't need to alter the curves. I just need to be here with the keyframes. Now, read this carefully. One of these white blocks is a keyframe. These are the keyframes of scale. This is where you have the non-squish, and this is squished. So if I take these two keyframes and I'm just clicking on their general keyframe, and I hold down the control key, I can actually make copies, and I'll just move the keyframe down to frame number 12, and this means here it is not squashed, here it is squashed, and here it returns to a normal shape. It's only 2 frames. This is usually not done, 2 keyframes right after another, but hey, we have to make do. Now, what I'm going to do is actually select all these keyframes, this sequence of squashing, and move it right up to where it bounces on the floor. So I can just hold down the control key, and I'm just picking it up here, and then let go of the mouse and click and drag again, and click and drag again. Right, so what do we got? You see this really tiny little squash. I know, but it works. It works. Just take it from me, it works as an animation. And we're going to get the stretch animation in a second. But then we have to actually go into this one, because now that we've got the squish all figured out, hey, maybe it's time to save your project. And we'll go to the stretch and roll. Now, why is the stretch here? Because if something stretches, it will stretch over the middle point, not over the bottom or the top. So that's why I put it here. And it's separate, but it will look exactly the same, because if I stretch this, Of course it looks like it's the same tire, but because we put these two animations right on top of each other, it will look like it's one movement from one thing. All right, so we're going to do exactly the same as we did, slightly reversed, and I'll just make this a 1.2, not too much, and this is a 0.8. So I'm actually reversing this. So let's make keyframes here, and we're going to go to frame 9, and we're going to give them a keyframe here too. So these values don't change, but here it switches right back into 1 and 1, because otherwise it would overlap with the squash, and it would actually counter the squash. So we got this one, and when it jumps off here, maybe, yeah, that's a good thing. We'll just make it a 1.2 again, and a 0.8 again, and I'll just give this a keyframe. So now we have 3 keyframes here again, and we're going to do exactly the same trick as with the squash. Now, because this node is animated, I get this in the list, and I'll go down to the scale, and I'll copy these 3 keyframes. So I'm just going to move it down here, right? And again, right? And let's zoom this out a little bit. And again, but this time I'm just deleting the last frame because it doesn't have to stretch anymore because it's on the floor now, definitely. And this one, I'll just offset a little bit, and that one offset a little bit. This is the stretching moment. It should be just beyond the middle of one single bounce. So let's see what we got. Yes. On to the final chapter.